Good evening and welcome to Democrat TV, a public service show where democratic values and public policy are discussed. My name is Kaylee Sheppard. I'm a junior at the University of Tennessee, and I'm also a senator in the Undergraduate Student Senate. Tonight we're going to be discussing Sex Week at the University of Tennessee and the funding of this event through the Student Programming Allocation Fee. In other words, we're going to be talking about Sex Week and the role of the student fees in funding an activity during that week. Our panel tonight is Cole Tipton, co-chair of SEAT Committee, Dr. Mary McAlpin, professor of French, Kerri Miller, UT staff and parent of UT students who also participate in SEAT. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
I think tonight we can start with the history of Sex Week and kind of how all these issues have started to come up in our state legislature, if anyone wants to start.
You were here at the original
Well,
history.
Sex Week first took place in 2013, and so this is the 7th year. We just finished the 7th year. Cole is still exhausted from having
recovering. Yeah.
co-chaired this amazing week of events. There were problems right from the beginning. I didn't become faculty co-advisor till 2015.
Oh, okay.
And I'm not this year either, but I was faculty co-advisor for 4 years. And I know the first year they withdrew the funding 2 weeks before the event, and that created huge problems because there were contracts with performers and speakers and educational people coming in from all over the states. But they managed to raise private funding, and it's been basically a problem every year.
So did it go off as planned? Enough public funding?
They managed to raise private funding and get funding from departments.
That's encouraging because that speaks to the future as well. So.
It does. Yes. And then this year things blew up because of the controller's report,
Right.
which came out in the fall.
Yeah. Well, came out actually in the spring. Had been working on
last
since
spring.
the fall.
Oh, okay.
This spring it came
Oh,
out.
it came out this
Yeah,
spring.
Yeah, the
earlier
comptroller's.
this spring. Yeah, they
and
called
this has
for
been.
it.
I mean, the
Feels
reports.
In February,
It
I
has
think,
been longer.
Yeah.
But I mean, you're right in talking about the issues and the history of Sex Week. It's been plagued with issues from the beginning, which has made this really interesting in that, unlike a lot of other student orgs, I think we have to constantly keep in mind of how we're going to reinvent ourselves, because it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. And so the when is now, as we'll probably talk about later.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the comptroller's report, something interesting to note is that they made it very directed towards Sex Week, but Sex Week is not the only event that receives funds from the student allocation, well, what was the student allocation fee. So what was your reaction like from your organization, how to be so directly called out by the state legislature when it was a broader issue that they were dealing with here?
Right. We made that very public in our statement. To have it be characterized as an embarrassment after having multiple meetings with many of the admin who were there in front of the legislature. I just said thrown underneath the bus. I mean, it's a cliche, but that's exactly what happened. Of like, if you have, it was a pandering moment of pandering to the legislature and trying to get them to calm down and not keep attacking the rest of the university, because it is sort of like that tug of war with just whoever else, like these other student orgs get caught in the middle.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And now the future of all student organization funding is up in the air for next year. No one knows how much money there will be, who will be allocating the money. It's all still being decided at this fairly late date.
Oh,
Semester's almost
extremely
over.
late.
Absolutely. No, I have many friends who are in student organizations that focus on programming, and right now they're supposed to be preparing for the proposals in May, and there's no action being done. They're saying they're going to have a loose plan by June, but still no word to these organizations that receive this money, what to prepare, what to expect with this new process that they've learned so very well to do, and now they're having to change all of their plans, which I think is a part of this comptroller's report that is important to remember, but I think also it's very important to look at the fact that, again, SEAT has been thrown under the bus for an issue that has been blown out of proportion, in my opinion, as a student. And I think that's what's very interesting is, like, they try to paint this picture of students are embarrassed, faculty are embarrassed, everyone's
Parents
embarrassed.
are mortified.
Yeah, parents are not sending their kids here. And I think that...
Pulling them out.
Yeah, and I think that culture is very interesting around Sex Week because that's not the case whatsoever. I'm involved in many areas of campus, and most students either think Sex Week is great, they don't really care, and they don't go, or they don't even know what it is. And so I think that's very interesting is that they sit here and try to put words in the mouths of students, but students aren't necessarily saying this. So that kind of leads me to like my next topic I really want to look over is kind of like what is the real perception of Sex Week from faculty, from staff, from parents?
Yeah.
Like,
And we also want to remember that students don't have to attend any of these. None of this is
Absolutely.
mandatory, and so we definitely want to come back around to touch on, you know, what these fees are and what the expectation is with that. But
yeah, absolutely.
Right,
So-
because student fees don't necessarily go to Sex Week unless the student deliberately opts in.
right,
And so it's by no means forced on anyone, even in terms of the minors. It's like $25, the student fee, something like that you pay, student programming fee.
It's
about
around
20.
25.
it's gone up to that. I
20,
remember it was
25.
about 15 when my kids
Yeah.
started at UT.
Yeah, and that's what something's very interesting is like if a student or two doesn't want to allocate their money towards an organization or an event that they might find controversial or not aligning with their particular values, they don't have to opt in. They can send their student fee to construction, which to each his own.
Which is interesting of
yeah.
how the fee's structured, and I do appreciate that the fee goes into a pot for all student organizations, and then we can talk about this marketplace of free ideas of how people are like, I just don't want my money going to Sex Week.
Right.
But it's fine going literally anywhere else,
Right.
to any other organization or any other programming.
Yep.
So,
That's what I've just always found.
And what's clear is that students will not be involved ultimately in allocating this money next year, because up until now, the student fee money has been allocated by the Student Programming Allocation Committee, which was comprised of staff, students, and faculty. And I served on it for a year, and people had to produce very complex applications for this money. By no means was Sex Week favored over other groups. If
Right.
Sex Week got more money, it was because they were producing a larger week-long event. Plenty
And
of
those
other
students
groups.
were working very hard to write an excellent grant proposal.
And because they wrote excellent grant proposals.
we put
right,
together a
so-
binder.
Yeah.
That's what I think was also interesting is they try to paint this picture in the news and with the state is that Sex Week and SEAT are taking money away from other organizations.
Not true.
But to my knowledge as an involved student, there's usually money left over, and the issues when students don't get money, it's that the proposal is not within the means of the pot of money, or that they didn't properly propose that
Right.
organization's event.
Right. Or they flat out didn't fill out the paperwork correctly.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's an important life lesson. You got to learn how to do those forms.
Yeah,
Actually.
really important, and it's really difficult. From what I've heard, can you talk a
Yeah.
little bit about what the process
Oh
is?
yeah, absolutely. So my one time going through the process, and very in-depth time, it's so you basically need to know exactly what your event's going to be. Quite a few months out for us, anyways. If you're doing it the semester before the event happens, so you need to have all your speakers, backgrounds on your speakers, their proposed events, and then all of the justifications for that. How's it contributing to campus climate? How's this going to improve the educational value of the university? Questions, and then you got to get into the budget after that. So it's everything. It really is a holistic sort of. I thought it was a good learning experience too. Of like, I feel like I could do a great program anywhere because I know what it means to go and negotiate contracts with speakers.
I
So you
remember
put together. Sorry.
when my daughter was working on helping with the proposal, I think it was last year or a couple of years ago,
Right.
she was fascinated by this concept of having to write a grant proposal for this event
Right.
that fit within the university's educational programming and policies and philosophies, and was at first struggling with that until she started really reading about those. I was like, well, it fits. If you
Right.
look into what
100%.
UT claims its values are, and one of their stated values as part of their mission statement speaks directly to diversity and inclusion, and talks about respecting all people's voices and
voices.
all
All means
It all
all.
means all.
specifically talks about respecting all viewpoints and opinions, and yet I don't know if you or Meg wrote in the response to the comptroller's report about we do not feel that we're being respected.
No,
and that
we're
gets
not.
right to the heart of this supposed value that our university has.
Absolutely. And you said something interesting about the proposal process that I find interesting is you have to prove your educational worth, per se, of your program. And I just found it interesting, especially in the comptroller's report in the policy suggestions number 2, they kind of said, well, let's outlaw seat from putting this on and make it just UTK that can do the sexual education on campus, which I find very shocking coming from our state legislature, because a lot of the policies they have surrounding sex education in our state are unclear, contradicting, and abstinence-based, which statistics in college show that is not necessarily the sexual mentality of many college students.
Right.
And often a lot of the education that happens in our Tennessee public schools are heteronormative-based and abstinence-based. So I find that really interesting, is that they kind of suggest that, we should take care of educating people on these topics that SEAT educates people on, but our state itself can't even handle to do that.
Ironically, I think a lot of students in SEAT, if they came from Tennessee and came from Knoxville, they joined that organization because of the oppression that they were under in high school with our legislature's approach to sex education. Those students learned about advocacy because they were forced to sit in classes where females were shamed, members of the LGBTQ+ community were shamed, where no valuable information was being provided, where misinformation was. So they grew up with anger about this and wanting to become socially active.
And where teenage pregnancy was at a ridiculously high level.
Absolutely. So they came into UT already with the mindset of advocacy and support to their peers. Many of them were peer educators in high school and then continued. So.
And this is why it makes me so mad as a faculty member that in response to the Controller's Report, President Boyd and Chancellor Davis expressed their embarrassment at SEAT and accused SEAT of using sensationalistic titles instead of having an educational mission, which is absolutely contrary to the truth, and not it was directly responding to the legislators and not at all to the students.
Right.
And the issue of constitutionality comes up in terms of student free speech.
Absolutely.
Because these are fees paid by students. They have opted in to have students use these fees in the way that the student groups see fit. And that includes organizing Sex Week, giving titles to the events. And the controllers and Boyd and Davis both accused SEAT of being unwilling to compromise on the issue of the titles. And this is a direct attack. Well, first, patently false, and also a direct attack on student free speech.
Yeah, I missed several classes last semester and this semester to go to administration meetings to talk about titles. One time with as little as an hour's notice so we can get the SPAC process rolling in the fall. A large part of that was contingent on our willingness to work on titles. We struck BDSM 101 from our Quips and Chains titles this year to throw them a bone of the possibility of that being an issue. But it's never enough until we actually remove the content.
No,
which
it's
is
the content.
Which is where the discussion started to shift
content.
after that. Was like, why do you need a dominatrix to do this discussion? Why couldn't you get someone else to do this?
And I never, as a parent, as a person following Sex Week over the years, would ever believe in a million years that changing the title butt stuff to anal sex is going to make the legislature happy.
No.
They just don't want to talk about these things. They don't want to think our precious sheltered children are hearing about these things.
Which I find interesting, like, regarding the priorities of our state legislature. Like, they're so worried about Sex Week and how student money, that's their own money, is being looked at, but yet student debt is outrageous. Students can't afford food on campus. They can't afford housing, but they're focused on 1 week of programming that's actually benefiting us.
Which they recognize was such a small fraction of any budget of UT.
Absolutely. So that's what I find interesting, is like them focusing on this one small issue when like there's so many other issues like diversity and inclusion.
Rampant racism.
Blackface on campus.
Sexual assaults.
But the most messages we get is this 1 week of programming.
Right. It's actual programming with educational content.
To counter those issues.
Right.
Yeah.
And there's a national conversation which explains why the legislature is focusing on Sex Week, which is the idea that students at public universities are being forced to submit to these outrageous, extreme left-wing ideas about gender equality and gender normative pronouns and all these things, when in fact, if they want to support student free speech, including the free speech of conservative students on campus, they're going to have to allow students who are not conservative, according to their judgment, to also enjoy free speech. And that's what they do not want.
Yeah, which I find very interesting, because recommendation number one was just a law to ban Sex Week, which is blatant.
Which they presented
so
with
illegal.
a nuclear bomb on their slideshow. To
so
the
everything
Senate
else is
committee.
easier. Everything else is more palatable.
Exactly.
Yeah, which I find just outrageous, because it's blatantly unconstitutional. so for a suggestion from our state legislature to be so blatantly against the values of our country, I just found shocking. And FIRE, a free speech organization, actually made comment to that in an article.
Right.
Yes, that
And
was an excellent article.
Speaking
Yeah.
of national embarrassment, they said FIRE is a national organization. It's the foundation for individual rights in education, and they support free speech for faculty and students. And they concluded their article on this: UT has sacrificed a constitutional funding mechanism, SPAC, the Programming Allocation Committee, in favor of political expediency. And they see the potential for a real lawsuit if, in fact, students do not control the programming that is paid for by student fees.
Which is just not what we need to be focusing on as a university. We have so many issues. Our initiative, at least as long as I can remember, is they scream we want to be a top 25 university, research university, yet a lot of the actions that our state legislature is taking and the difficulties that we're facing as a student body that we have to be focusing on is things that aren't important. We're not working towards these goals of
You
being
want to
a
be top 25,
university.
and you claim you support diversity and inclusion. In fact, that's one of your stated values, and yet you're sending a message out to potential really smart, amazing people who could come to UT as faculty and staff and students and saying, but here are the things you're not allowed to talk about over here. And they just all happen to be related to seat.
Right. And I also think like what we're saying is it's really just illustrating where the core values are of the university, of political expediency, and of course, cash talks very well for our state legislature. And so I think that's sort of like where the power of the lawsuit steps in, is it's not really even rectifying any sort of constitutional issue. If we look back at the Title IX lawsuit, it's really is it easier and cheaper to do? Is it cheaper to keep things under the table and kind of drag this out, or is it cheaper and more expedient to do it that way? So
Yeah, that's why overall just the issue with this is that students' voices are kind of being condemned in a way and being painted in a way that, literally.
to hear UT students, and these students in the seat are some of the brightest students at this university.
And hardworking.
The response, your response to the comptroller report was beautifully written, and you didn't even begin to touch on all the accolades of the students in that organization,
right.
because you just don't have space.
On the alumni.
So lots of lots of honors, all the honors that these students have acquired during their time at UT and since. Why is UT and the legislature embarrassed by these students? These are some of the most successful individuals
and we're not
at the
unique
university.
in the sense that we have a sex week. Harvard has a sex week.
Yeah.
ETSU has a sex week.
Yeah, other
under a
states,
different
even some
name.
other
schools have
southern
a sex
states.
week.
Yeah, southern schools.
And yet we somehow are the ones that get all the attention when other universities in the same state, in incredible universities in our country, are doing the same exact programming and not having any sort of problems whatsoever.
And I think I'll brag on the board that supports me through this. And I think the reason that we're such in the front is because we do the sex week the best. I mean, you don't hear about Northwestern's sex week. You don't hear about Yale's sex week. And I've tried to pitch this to administration and other people's, like, if you want to really change the conversation, reframe it, this is a big thing that no one else is doing and cannot pull off at the level and the way we're doing it. Like, if we actually threw some support behind it, you want to talk about shooting things to a top 25, the critical gender theories that we're talking about in sex week and the speakers that we're bringing on the forefront of academic thought. This is it. This is your way into
And people
that.
forget the conversations that SEAT brings to the table at our university. Like this year, talking about body positivity and talking about sex work and the legality of that. That was one of the most fascinating things I've ever heard. That program this year, and just they're bringing all these ideas that students wouldn't have been exposed to otherwise. And I think that's where we need to shift the conversation.
Nobody else talks about the importance of consent in this conversation except the SEAT organization. And I think so many students at UT are learning about that. They certainly weren't taught it in school, in high school.
Right.
And they want to know what that is. They understand it's complex. And they're eager to hear information about navigating relationships with that in mind. And I'm so grateful that it exists for the sake of my kids to be able to have those conversations and grow up and go through adulthood and have that language, have those skills.
And the only people who know what conversations need to be had and how they should be had and how it will reach other students are the students themselves. I'm a 50-something cisgender straight white woman.
Yeah.
I'm old. I just don't have the same connection to
Right.
sexuality that students do. I mean, it's back in the day, I would have been leading the way, but
Right.
now I should sit back and let the
But
students.
you know, I
still
can
a great
remember being
supporter.
in college, and that's part
Me
of what
too.
frustrates me is the hypocrisy of these older white legislators. Like, you were in college, you were in your 20s at some point. Don't
Yeah.
pretend that the sexuality issues were never an issue for you,
Right.
and try to shut down today's generation from having.
Can I give a shout out
conversations.
to one legislator, which
Please.
is Senator Richard Briggs,
Yes, it's
Who
been
is
so responsive.
a very conservative individual politically and socially. But he has gotten to the heart of the question here by asking the state attorney general to rule on the constitutionality of various. He has 9 different possibilities with regard to sex week, including just having the legislature say no more sex week. It's like, let's just make it clear what is the constitutionality with regard to student free speech about these things. The attorney general refused to do that because they don't want to make it clearer
Right.
what is the constitutionality is.
Absolutely.
They just want this to keep going, and they're hoping the students
If it's
will
muddy
shut up
enough,
and
maybe
go
people
away.
just give up.
Give up.
Right.
Right.
Exactly.
I'm like, really? You think these
Not
smart
us.
20-somethings are just going to give up and go away?
So how do we make sure that students don't give up? How do we? I think
Right.
it's
Yeah.
good for us to the last little
Yeah,
bit of our
that's good.
program
I like
to
that.
focus on how do we make sure that SEAT feels supported, that
Right.
students feel supported,
Yeah.
and how can viewers as well as everyone at the university kind of make sure that we are doing the things that are constitutional and what these students actually want on this campus. I mean, I guess you can speak from
Yeah,
a SEAT member.
there's definitely number one, top one, come, show out, come to the events. If people are there, then it's clearly demonstrating that it's needed. And I think people really did that this year. So thank you to people who did that. But we have to keep doing it. And anyone who's come has never come and been like, oh, well, this was cool. I'm glad I got to support you all. It's always, I came and I wasn't expecting to learn this or like find that out. Like it's always a moment of discovery for people. So I think that we'll see what the financial situation is going to look like. I have no clue where that's going, but our merchandise sales went so well, and I hope everyone enjoyed their T-shirts who got those. So that's really the 2 big things. And depending how this conversation shifts, like with other student organizations, I think that's something else. Is like making sure they're involved.
Absolutely.
People who have a relevant stake in this need to be talking with each other. And if things aren't shifting the way that they need to, then no more business as usual. Like we shut it down.
Yeah,
shut
I
things
think it's
down.
really key to
Yeah.
preserve student voices within that committee, whatever committee that ends up being, to allocate the student programming fee. Because if we're the students paying into it, it should be us deciding where our money's going. And
Very
I think
frustrating
that's
not to know what that
really
makeup
key
of that is going to
overall,
be yet. That's,
is
And-
making sure.
And not just to have an opinion and a voice, but to have a deciding
Decisive.
Right.
factor in the end.
Absolutely.
Having a vote,
yes, a vote.
Yes,
a place at the
final
table,
vote.
and a final vote.
Do we know anything regarding if anything else is going to happen with the comptroller's report within the legislature? Do you know anything?
I haven't heard anything, as was relayed to me via President Boyd in the meeting following that release. We're in a truce with the state right now. We're in a truce with our state legislature.
Wow.
So that's where we're at. Stay tuned for our announcement Friday. We'll see how well that holds up.
Would you like to give any information regarding the next year's Sex Week,
Next
where we
year's-
are excited about?
Yeah, well, looking towards the future, like I said, tomorrow, this Friday, we're announcing just a little thing people might want to come to. So that'll be wonderful and exciting. And then, of course, we've made it a regular thing now to show up to Knox Pride. We have a great time. People seem to enjoy us being there. It's a great way to talk about our mission to the people we're trying to reach. So people can expect that. And then for Sex Week next year, let me make sure I'm giving you the right dates, April 2020, so March 31st into April 5th is what that week looks like. So first week of April again, so people can go ahead and mark their calendars.
No, that's fantastic. And I think the ultimate goal of our university and all the stakeholders is to make sure that we are establishing a fund that SEAT and other organizations can actually pull money out of,
Right.
and then transitioning to, okay, how are we going to make sure that this is actually an equitable process, and making sure that SEAT is getting the resources they need, all the other student organizations who have been affected by this comptroller's report, that they're getting the resources that they need, and we just keep students in mind first,
Right.
and not necessarily what people that may have never gone to this university have a feeling.
And the small
right.
startup orgs that even haven't
Yeah.
been founded yet, like this makes it so difficult if you're somebody trying to do an organization with 5 people and maybe you just want to put on some sort of little speaker dinner event. Like now you have to wade through so much just
Right.
other stuff to try and do something else.
And
I think
this
it's
slow attrition of student free speech that comes with setting all these obstacles in the way of organizations. It's bad for the university. It's bad for the students. It's bad for the state.
Yeah, I think that's really key. Is it all ends up tying back to students having their choice to express themselves however way they like, and to make sure that they are being educated on a university. I know, shocking, and we try to
Novel
like
concept.
suggest these policy considerations of banning students from being able to educate themselves in areas where the state legislature fails to educate.
Right.
And I think we just need to continue to make sure that we are protecting students' right to education at a university.
It gets to the heart of that question. What is the function of the University of Knoxville, of University of Tennessee, Knoxville? And one of the people in the Senate claimed that it was to promote Tennessee values. Well, I'm a Tennessean, my kids are Tennessean. I don't know,
these are Tennessee
who
values,
what her particular values are, but clearly she doesn't like sex week, so it's not that. But
And I'd like to push back on that. Like, I'm an
Yeah.
out-of-state student, and I might not necessarily align with all the Tennessee values, but I don't think that makes my education experience at this university any less valuable. I think making more diverse values in an area that we're all learning together makes the experience and the success of a university so much better.
I don't think parents pay to send their kids to college so that they come out regurgitating what somebody's written down values were. First of all, there aren't any written down, so we're just supposed to figure that out. And then
Right.
they're here to learn and broaden their horizons, right? And sort of look at the world through multiple lenses,
Absolutely.
not to just come here and sit and be told this is how you're going to think and this is how you are going to present to the world as a Tennessean.
Absolutely.
Like, that was not the purpose of college.
It's not the mission statement.
It's certainly not the mission statement.
And it
Touche.
certainly violates the First Amendment.
Yes. I think that's what it gets back to, is some people might not believe it's necessarily Tennessee values, but it's within the founding of our
And
country.
Yeah.
And again, are repeated in the Campus Free Speech Act,
Yes.
which our legislature passed, and the words which they use to say vile and controversial speech is protected in their own
Right.
law.
Right.
If we can
And
have
it's-
Nazis on campus, we
Comfortably
can have
housed
sex
in
week.
facilities, then that, yeah.
Yeah. That's what I think is very interesting, is to bring up a different campus issue, is that they're so focused on condemning Sex Week and trying to make sure Sex Week doesn't happen, but I'm not seeing a whole lot of action to make sure that people aren't writing hatred on the rock.
Right.
People aren't posting hatred online
And
towards our
right,
students.
The white supremacists were coming back to target Sex Week this year, like we talked about.
Yeah.
Like the week before, they did a little protest on Cumberland. Little. I'm going to emphasize that.
Yeah.
There's not many of them.
Yes.
But these are people who are known to be violent individuals, and they're targeting us now, and they have in past, and with The Rock, been targeting other marginalized communities, particularly a Jewish community. And so for Sex Week to continue to be the target makes it very clear who's aligned with who.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This is interesting. I want to thank you guys for participating in this discussion today. It's been really great. I've learned a lot from you guys and from having an insider from SEAT. I really appreciate
Happy
that.
to be here.
Yeah. Again, I'd just like to highlight our panelists. We've got Cole Tipton, the co-chair of the SEAT committee, Dr. Mary McAlpin, a professor of French at the university, and Carrie Miller, who's UT
Martin.
Martin. Oh, I'm so sorry. UT staff and parent of UT student who's designated in working with SEAT.
I have 2 students. in
two
SEAT.
students.
I just didn't want people to think that was the parent of all of the students. in SEAT. But,
Not all
yeah.
of them, just a couple.
Just a couple of the best.
That's right.
And again, I'm Kaylee Sheppard. I am a student in the University of Tennessee, and I want to thank you for watching. Make sure to tune in next week for another interesting discussion on Democrat TV, and good night.